8 years. That's how long I let my daughter-in-law treat me like dirt. My name is Edward Johnson, and last Tuesday changed everything. Picture this: a woman screaming at her child's grandfather to stay away from my baby because he's just a janitor who failed at life. What she didn't know? That janitor secretly owned her workplace, the same workplace where she'd been stealing from students for months. Some people think money talks. I learned it whispers. For 4 years, I pushed a mop through hallways while corrupt admissions counselors destroyed dreams for cash. $89,000 in bribes. 156 students cheated out of their futures, all happening right under my nose. The beautiful irony? My daughter-in-law was the ringleader. When she finally crossed the line that mattered most, hurting innocent kids, I had to choose: stay quiet and protect family peace, or expose the truth and watch her world crumble. I chose justice. Hey, if stories like this hook you, hit that subscribe button. I'd love to know which state you're watching from because this gets wild. Here's how one family dinner destroyed a criminal empire. It started small, like most cruelty does. When I first moved in with my son Danny and Stephanie 8 years ago, she made jokes about my career change. I'd been working the night janitor shift at Riverside Community College since 2019, after Danny's car accident left him partially disabled and needing family support. From professor to mop pusher, she'd laugh at dinner parties. At least Edward knows his limitations now. What she didn't know was why I really took that job. Danny needed someone flexible, someone who could drive him to physical therapy at noon and still earn a paycheck. The night shift meant I was home during the day when he needed me most. But explaining that would require Stephanie to see me as more than a failure, and she'd already made up her mind. The BMW X5 she drives costs $65,000. The Louis Vuitton handbag she carries to work? $3,200. She loves mentioning these numbers, especially when I'm counting out $20 bills to pay my share of groceries from my 2015 Honda Civic's glove compartment. Must be nice being broke, she said last Christmas, watching me count out my contribution to Danny's medical bills. No stress about real money. The insults escalated over time. When my grandson Tommy turned 5, Stephanie started limiting my contact with him. "Don't touch him with those dirty janitor hands," became her regular refrain. Tommy needs to understand the difference between successful people and, well, people like you. She'd schedule family photos when I was at work, delete my number from Tommy's iPad, tell neighbors I was just the help they'd hired to live with them. But the moment I knew things had gone too far was 3 months ago when Tommy started avoiding me entirely. "Mommy says you're not very smart," he whispered one afternoon when Stephanie was out. "She says smart people don't clean toilets." That night I sat in my small room, the converted basement office that used to be Danny's man cave, and wondered how I'd let it come to this. On my nightstand sat a photo from 2018. Me in my professor robes. At graduation, Danny proud beside me, both of us believing the future held nothing but promise. Stephanie found that photo once and laughed. "Look at you pretending to be important," she said, putting it face down. "At least now you know what you're actually worth." What she didn't see was the small tablet I kept hidden in my janitor cart, the one I used to manage a foundation that had given scholarships to over 2,000 students, the one that connected me to bank accounts she couldn't imagine. But I kept quiet. Family peace seemed worth my pride. Danny was happy. Tommy was healthy. I could handle some harsh words if it meant staying close to them. I should have known Stephanie wouldn't be satisfied with just hurting me. The real problem started when she got promoted to senior admissions counselor at the college in March. Suddenly, she had power over the dreams of 18-year-olds who reminded me why I'd become an educator in the first place. Power she was about to abuse in ways that would make her treatment of me look gentle. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because before I could stop her from destroying other people's children, I had to watch her try to destroy mine. The text message arrived on my phone at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in July. It was from Danny. "Dad, we need to talk. Stephanie showed me some things about your job that worry me." I knew immediately what had happened. Stephanie had been building a case against me for months, photographing me leaving the college at odd hours, questioning why I had access to areas most janitors wouldn't. "She thinks you might be unstable," Danny said the next morning over coffee. His voice carried the weight of a man torn between his wife and his father. "The way you hang around that college after hours. Some of the staff know your name. It's weird, Dad." Stephanie had done her homework. She'd convinced Danny that his father was either stealing from the college or suffering from some kind of mental breakdown that made me think I belonged in academic spaces. "Maybe it's time to consider assisted living," Danny continued, not meeting my eyes. "Stephanie found some really nice places. You wouldn't have to work anymore." The trap was perfect. Either I was a thief or I was delusional. Either way, I needed to be removed from Tommy's life before I became a bad influence. That afternoon, while Danny was at physical therapy, Stephanie cornered me in the kitchen. "Here's what's going to happen," she said, leaning against the granite countertop she'd chosen during their renovation. "You're going to start looking for your own place. Somewhere more appropriate for your income level." She slid a folder across the counter. Inside were printouts from senior living facilities. The cheapest option was $1,800 a month, nearly my entire janitor salary. "I've been patient," she continued, "but Tommy's getting older. He's asking questions about why Grandpa lives in the basement like some kind of... Well, you know what you look like." I knew exactly what I looked like. A 60-year-old man in work clothes, driving a car older than some of my former students, counting dollar bills to contribute to a household where the wine budget exceeded my monthly paycheck. "You have until the end of August," Stephanie said. "Find somewhere else to play house or I'll find it for you." The real gut punch came that evening when Tommy ran up to me with a drawing. "I made this for you, Grandpa," he said, holding up a crayon picture of our family. There was Danny in a tie, Stephanie in a dress, Tommy in the middle, and a small figure in the corner, separated from the others by what looked like a fence. "That's you at work," Tommy explained proudly. "Mommy says you have to stay there because it's where you belong." I tucked that drawing into my shirt pocket and wore it to work that night. As I pushed my cart through the empty hallways of Riverside Community College, past the administrative offices where Stephanie spent her days, I did the math on what losing my family would cost me. Tommy's bedtime stories, priceless. Teaching him to throw a baseball, irreplaceable. Watching him grow up from a distance, maybe seeing him every other weekend if Stephanie was feeling generous, unbearable. But there was more than just personal loss at stake. That same week, I'd noticed something troubling in the college's application system. As someone with administrative access, Stephanie didn't know I could see patterns in admissions decisions that made my stomach turn. Qualified students from low-income families were being rejected at unprecedented rates. Their applications were marked with codes I didn't recognize. Their financial aid packages were mysteriously unavailable, despite clear eligibility. Meanwhile, students with mediocre grades but excellent family bank accounts were getting acceptance letters within days of applying. I'd built my career on the belief that education should lift people up, not price them out. If I lost access to Tommy, I'd also lose my ability to investigate what looked like systematic corruption in the very institution I'd spent my life savings to keep alive. The students being cheated out of their futures couldn't afford private investigators or legal teams. Most of them didn't even know they were being cheated. If I walked away now, moved to some assisted living facility, and played the role of the failed grandfather, those kids would never get justice. But if I stayed and fought, I'd have to reveal who I really was, and that would change everything for everyone. That night, as I emptied trash cans in the admissions office, I made my decision. Some things are worth more than family peace. Some fights are worth having, even when you're not sure you can win. The confrontation happened on a Thursday night in the main hallway, under the fluorescent lights that hummed like angry wasps. I was wheeling my cart past the admissions office at 11:30 p.m. when I saw the light still on in Stephanie's corner office. Through the glass door, I could see her shredding documents, lots of them. I pulled out my phone and started recording. "What the hell are you doing?" Stephanie's voice cut through the silence as she yanked open her office door. She was still in her work clothes, a designer blazer that cost more than most families spend on groceries in a month. "Just working," I said, continuing to film as she tried to block my view of the shredder. "You're not supposed to be here this late." Her voice carried that familiar edge of superiority. "This area is restricted after 10 p.m. Not for maintenance staff. Maintenance staff don't lurk outside faculty offices with their phones out." She stepped closer, and I could smell her expensive perfume. Something French and complicated that probably cost more than my car payment. Delete that video, Edward. Why? What are you shredding at midnight that's so important? Her face changed then. The mask of professional courtesy slipped, revealing something uglier underneath. You think because you push a mop around here that you understand how this place works? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think your little janitor badge gives you the right to question actual professionals? I kept filming. I'm just curious why someone who processes college applications is destroying documents after hours. Those are my personal files. The lie came too quickly. And even if they weren't, what would a janitor know about admissions procedures? More than you might think. That stopped her. For just a moment, uncertainty flickered across her face. What's that supposed to mean? It means I notice things. Patterns, like how qualified students keep getting rejected while rich kids with terrible grades get accepted overnight. Stephanie's expression hardened. You're delusional. This is exactly what I told Danny about. You're creating conspiracy theories because you can't accept that your life didn't work out. She moved to grab my phone, but I stepped back. Don't touch me, Stephanie. Give me that phone or I'm calling security. Go ahead. James Wilson knows me pretty well. Another flicker of confusion. James Wilson was the head of security, not someone a janitor should know by name. You're losing it, Edward. This obsession with being important, with mattering, it's sad. Danny's right to be worried. She pulled out her own phone. I'm calling him right now. He needs to see this video of you harassing staff and making up stories about admissions fraud. Don't. Why? Afraid he'll finally see what we're dealing with? She was already dialing. I could hear the phone ringing through her speaker. Danny? Sorry to wake you, but your father is at the college right now, filming me in my office and making wild accusations. I reached over and ended the call. You just made a big mistake, Stephanie said, her voice dropping to a whisper. That's assault. I have witnesses. The security cameras saw everything. The same cameras that recorded you shredding documents. For the first time, she looked genuinely nervous. Those were personal files, she repeated. And even if they weren't, who's going to believe a janitor over a senior admissions counselor with a master's degree? She stepped closer, her voice turning patronizing. Edward, I know this is hard for you. Your life didn't turn out the way you hoped. You thought you'd retire as some respected professor, but instead you're cleaning toilets at the same college where you used to pretend to matter. She paused, letting that sink in. But you can't take out your disappointment on innocent staff members. You can't create these fantasies where you're some kind of whistleblower hero instead of just this. She gestured at my uniform, my cart, my entire existence, as if it were something distasteful she'd found on her shoe. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to delete that video. You're going to apologize for disturbing me while I was working late. And you're going to promise never to bother the administrative staff again. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I saved the video to my cloud storage. I don't think so. Then you're fired. You can't fire me. Watch me. I'll have security escort you out tonight, and HR will have your termination letter ready by morning. Good luck explaining to Danny why you lost the only job pathetic enough to hire you. She smiled then, the kind of smile that comes from knowing you hold all the cards. Unless, of course, you want to be reasonable. Delete the video, apologize, and promise to stay in your lane. Do that, and we can pretend this never happened. I looked down at my phone, at the video that showed her destroying documents in the middle of the night. Then I looked back at her. I'll think about it. You have until tomorrow morning. She turned to go back into her office, then paused. Oh, and Edward? Danny's expecting you to have found your own place by the end of the month. Don't make this harder on him than it has to be. The door clicked shut behind her. I stood alone in the hallway, holding evidence of something that could destroy her career, knowing she held the power to destroy my family. But what Stephanie didn't know was that by threatening my job, she'd just given me the perfect excuse to make some phone calls I'd been putting off for too long. Some mistakes can't be undone. She was about to learn that the hard way. The next morning, I called in sick to my janitor's shift for the first time in 4 years. Instead, I spent the day making visits that had been overdue for months. My first stop was Helen Carter's office on the 3rd floor of the administration building. Helen had been vice president of student affairs for 12 years, and we'd worked together on student retention initiatives back when I was still officially faculty. Edward! She stood up from her desk as I knocked. I wasn't expecting to see you during business hours. She gestured for me to sit in one of the leather chairs across from her desk. The same chairs where I'd sat during budget meetings when my opinion actually mattered to people like Stephanie. "How are you holding up with everything?" Helen asked, her voice carrying the kind of concern reserved for old friends. "That's actually why I'm here." I pulled out my phone and showed her the video from the night before. Helen watched in silence, her expression growing darker with each second. "This is Stephanie Johnson, from admissions. My daughter-in-law." "Oh, Edward." Helen sat back in her chair. "This is complicated. She threatened to fire me last night." Helen almost smiled at that. Did she now? There was something in her tone, a knowingness that made me realize I wasn't the only one who'd noticed problems with the admissions department. "We've been getting complaints," Helen said carefully. "Nothing we could prove, but patterns in acceptance rates that don't match our historical data." She turned to her computer and pulled up a spreadsheet. "Look at this. Applications from students with family incomes below $30,000 are being rejected at 3 times the normal rate. Meanwhile, acceptance rates for students from families earning over $200,000 have increased by 40%. That's not a coincidence. No, it's not. But proving misconduct in admissions is tricky. We'd need documentation, witnesses, evidence of financial incentives." She looked at me meaningfully. "The kind of evidence that might require someone with unusual access to gather." My second stop was the security office in the basement. James Wilson looked up from his bank of monitors as I walked in. At 48, James was built like the college football player he'd once been, before a knee injury changed his trajectory and landed him in my introduction to social work class 15 years ago. "Dr. Johnson," he said, standing up automatically. "Just Edward these days, James." "Not to me, sir. You saved my academic career." James had been failing 3 classes his sophomore year when I helped him discover his passion for criminal justice. I'd written the recommendation letter that got him into the security management program. When he graduated, I'd been the one to suggest he apply for the campus security position. "I need a favor," I said. "Name it." I showed him the video of Stephanie shredding documents. "Can you tell me what the cameras picked up in the admissions office last Thursday night?" James's fingers flew across his keyboard. "Here we go." Stephanie Johnson. Arrived at her office at 10:15 p.m., left at 11:45 p.m. He enhanced the timestamp. Want to see what she was doing during that time? The footage was clear. Stephanie feeding document after document into an industrial shredder, pausing occasionally to check her phone, then continuing with methodical precision. "How many documents would you estimate?" I asked. "At least 200 pages, maybe more." James looked at me carefully. "Dr. Johnson, is there something I should know about?" "Possibly." "Can you make me copies of this footage? For you?" "Absolutely." My final stop was Patricia Davis's office at the Johnson Foundation headquarters, a converted warehouse space 2 miles from campus that I'd purchased and renovated in 2020. Patricia looked up from her grant applications as I walked in. "Edward!" Perfect timing. I just finished the quarterly scholarship report. Patricia had been running my foundation since its inception, managing the distribution of college scholarships to deserving students. She was one of only 3 people who knew the full extent of my financial involvement with both the foundation and the college itself. "How many applications did we fund this quarter?" I asked. 112 students. Total disbursement of $487,000. She handed me a thick folder. "But I'm worried about something. Applications from Riverside Community College students have dropped by 60% this year. We're not getting the referrals we usually do from the admissions office." I sat down across from her desk. "Show me the data." Patricia pulled up a comparison chart on her laptop. Last year, Riverside referred 43 students to our scholarship program. This year, 11. What reason did they give? "That's just it? They didn't give any reason? When I called the admissions office to ask about qualified applicants, they told me there simply weren't any students who met our criteria this year." I thought about the video of Stephanie shredding documents. "Patricia, I need you to pull our records for every Riverside student we've helped in the past 5 years. Cross-reference them with current admissions data if you can get it." "That's a lot of research. Can I ask why?" "Because I think someone's been stealing futures. And I think it's time we stop them." As I drove home that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Helen Carter. Found something interesting in the admissions database. Can you meet tomorrow? Then another text from James Wilson. Reviewed more security footage. You need to see this. And finally, one from Patricia. Pulled those records. The patterns are worse than we thought. When I walked into the house, Stephanie was waiting in the living room with Danny and Tommy. Dad, Danny said, Stephanie told me about last night. We need to talk. But as I looked at Stephanie's confident smile, I realized she had no idea that her threats had just activated a network of allies she didn't know existed. She thought she was dealing with a powerless janitor. She was about to learn how wrong she was. The family barbecue was Stephanie's idea. Danny's been so worried about his father lately, she announced to our neighbors, the Hendersons and the Moores, as they gathered in our backyard on Saturday afternoon. We thought it would be good to have everyone together. What she meant was time for a public intervention. I was manning the grill, flipping burgers and hot dogs, when Stephanie started her performance. You know, Edward's been having some episodes lately, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear, wandering around his workplace at all hours, making up stories about corruption and conspiracies. Mrs. Henderson, a retired teacher who'd always been kind to me, looked concerned. Is everything all right, Edward? I'm fine, Margaret. Just doing my job. Stephanie laughed, that sharp, cutting sound I'd grown to hate. His job is to empty trash cans, but lately he thinks he's some kind of detective, filming people and making wild accusations. She was enjoying this. The attention, the sympathy, the way everyone was looking at me with pity. Maybe it's early dementia, she continued, her voice dripping with fake concern. I mean, he's 61. He's been under a lot of stress since his career ended. Danny shifted uncomfortably. Stephanie, maybe we don't need to... No, honey, it's important that people understand what we're dealing with. Your father needs help, and the first step is acknowledging there's a problem. She turned to face me directly. Edward, why don't you tell everyone about your theories? About the big admissions conspiracy you've uncovered? All eyes turned to me. I could see the mixture of sympathy and embarrassment on their faces. Here was poor Edward Johnson, the failed professor who'd lost his mind along with his career. I'd rather not get into it, I said quietly. Oh, come on! Stephanie's voice got louder. Tell them about how you think I'm some kind of criminal mastermind. Tell them about the evidence you've been collecting. She was putting on a show now, playing the role of the long-suffering daughter-in-law dealing with a delusional family member. He follows me to work, she announced to the group. Lurks outside my office. Films me without permission. Yesterday he accused me of destroying important documents, as if a janitor would know what important documents look like. The humiliation was complete. I could see it in their faces, the neighbors who'd known me for years, watching me being exposed as a pathetic old man who couldn't accept his reduced circumstances. Stephanie, Danny said, his voice strained, maybe this isn't the time. When is the time, Danny? When he gets arrested for stalking? When he embarrasses Tommy at school with his conspiracy theories? She pulled out her phone. You want to see delusional? Look at this. She showed the group photos she'd taken of me at the college during evening hours. This is him at 10 p.m. wandering around the administrative building, and this is him filming me through my office window like some kind of creep. I watched our friends and neighbors examine the photos, their expressions shifting from sympathy to genuine concern. Edward, Mr. Moore said gently, maybe it's time to consider that you might need some help. Professional help, Stephanie added, before this gets worse. That's when Tommy spoke up. Why is everyone being mean to Grandpa? The conversation stopped. All eyes turned to my 7-year-old grandson, who was standing near the picnic table with tears in his eyes. Nobody's being mean, sweetie, Stephanie said, her voice instantly switching to saccharine sweetness. We're just worried about Grandpa because he's been confused lately. He's not confused, Tommy said fiercely. He helps me with my homework every night. He knows everything. Stephanie knelt down to Tommy's level. Honey, sometimes when people get older, their minds don't work as well as they used to. Grandpa is sick, and he doesn't understand that anymore. He's not sick. Tommy ran to me and wrapped his arms around my legs. Tell them, Grandpa. Tell them you're not sick. I looked down at my grandson, then at the circle of faces watching us. Danny's embarrassment, Stephanie's triumphant smirk, our neighbor's uncomfortable sympathy. This was the moment Stephanie had been building toward for months. The public confirmation that Edward Johnson was a broken old man who needed to be managed, medicated, and ultimately removed from his family's life. It's okay, Tommy, I said quietly. Sometimes grown-ups disagree about things. Stephanie stood up, satisfied. See? Even he won't defend his delusions when confronted with reality. She turned back to the group. This is why we've decided Edward needs to find his own place. Somewhere with supervision, where professionals can help him deal with his issues. Mrs. Henderson looked genuinely sad. Oh, Edward, I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry for him, Stephanie said. Be sorry for us. Do you know what it's like living with someone who thinks he's uncovered some massive conspiracy? Who can't accept that he's just a janitor now? She paused for effect. Just a janitor who failed at everything else and can't handle the truth about his life. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel Tommy's small arms tightening around my legs, his 7-year-old heart breaking as he watched the adults in his life tear down his grandfather. That's when my phone buzzed. A text from Helen Carter. Board meeting Monday, 9 a.m. Bring everything. Another from James Wilson. All security footage compiled. Ready when you are. And finally, from Patricia Davis. Financial forensics complete. The numbers don't lie. I looked up at Stephanie, still basking in the glow of her public victory, and made a decision that would change everything. You're right, Stephanie, I said quietly. I am just a janitor. Her smile widened. But on Monday morning, that's going to change. The confusion that flickered across her face was worth 8 years of humiliation. What's Monday? Danny asked. I picked up Tommy and looked at each face in the circle. Monday is when everyone learns exactly who I really am. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of weather that made everything look muted and serious. I put on my best suit, the charcoal gray one I'd worn to faculty meetings, back when my opinion mattered, and drove to Riverside Community College for what I knew would be the most important meeting of my life. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. in the main conference room on the 4th floor. As I walked through the lobby, I passed Stephanie heading toward the elevator. She was dressed in her power outfit, navy blazer, designer heels, carrying the leather briefcase that had cost more than most people's monthly rent. When she saw me in a suit instead of my janitor uniform, confusion flickered across her face. What are you doing here, Edward? Board meeting. Janitors don't attend board meetings. You're right, I said, stepping into the elevator beside her. They don't. The conference room was already half full when we arrived. Helen Carter sat at the head of the long mahogany table, with board members arranged on either side. I recognized most of them, local business leaders, retired educators, community activists, who cared about giving students opportunities. Stephanie took a seat near the middle of the table, still looking confused about why I was there. Ladies and gentlemen, Helen began, thank you for attending this emergency meeting. We're here to address serious allegations of misconduct in our admissions department. She gestured toward me. I'd like to introduce Dr. Edward Johnson, who will be presenting evidence of systematic corruption that has affected dozens of qualified students. Stephanie's face went white. Dr. Johnson? Board member Margaret Ross looked confused. I thought you were our night janitor. Helen smiled. That's what makes this situation so interesting. I stood up and moved to the front of the room where Helen had set up a laptop and projector. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Edward Johnson. I was a professor of social work at this institution for 24 years before taking a position in maintenance in 2019. I clicked to the first slide, a photo of me in academic robes at graduation ceremony. What most of you don't know is that in December 2016, when this college was facing budget cuts and potential closure, I purchased the institution using proceeds from the sale of my consulting business. The room erupted in murmurs. Stephanie gripped the edge of the table. That's impossible, she whispered. I clicked to the next slide. The official purchase documents, signed and notarized. I bought Riverside Community College for $12.4 million, with the agreement that my ownership would remain private to preserve the institution's independence and community character. Board member David Thompson leaned forward. Edward, are you saying you own this college? I'm saying I own 68% of this institution, and I've been watching it be corrupted from the inside. I clicked to the next slide security footage of Stephanie shredding documents. This is footage from Thursday night, August 15th, showing Stephanie Johnson destroying what we later discovered were applications from qualified low-income students. Stephanie shot to her feet. That's not what those were. Those were personal files. James Wilson, our head of security, can you please tell us what else the cameras recorded? James stood up from where he'd been sitting in the back of the room. Over the past 6 months, we've documented Mrs. Johnson arriving at the college after hours on 47 separate occasions. Each time, she spent between 30 and 90 minutes in her office, during which security cameras recorded her destroying documents, making photocopies of official transcripts, and meeting with individuals who do not appear in our visitor logs. I clicked to the next slide, bank records. Patricia Davis, director of the Johnson Foundation, conducted a financial investigation that revealed $89,340 in unexplained deposits to Stephanie Johnson's personal banking accounts over the past 18 months. Patricia stood up from her seat near the window. We cross-referenced these deposits with admissions decisions and found a direct correlation. Every deposit was followed within 72 hours by the acceptance of a student whose academic credentials fell well below our published standards. Stephanie was shaking now. This is harassment. This is revenge because I told the truth about Edward's mental state. Speaking of mental state, Helen said, we also need to address the psychological evaluations Mrs. Johnson filed with Human Resources. She held up a thick folder. These documents claim that Edward Johnson is suffering from dementia and poses a potential threat to students and staff. They're signed by Dr. Michael Harrison, a psychiatrist who, according to the medical board, had his license revoked 3 years ago for falsifying patient records. The room fell silent. Mrs. Johnson, Helen continued, did you pay Dr. Harrison to create these false psychological evaluations? I don't have to answer that. Actually, you do. I clicked to the next slide, copies of checks written from Stephanie's account to Dr. Harrison's consulting company. These financial records show payments totaling $6,000 for psychological consultations that never took place. Board member Susan Martinez spoke up. Mrs. Johnson, these are serious criminal allegations. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Stephanie looked around the room like a trapped animal. You don't understand, she said finally. He's been stalking me, following me, filming me without permission. I was protecting myself from a deranged old man who couldn't accept that his career was over. Protecting yourself, I said quietly, by destroying the futures of 156 qualified students. I clicked to the final slide, a list of names and photos. These are the students whose applications you destroyed or rejected in exchange for bribes. Students like Maria Santos, whose 4.2 GPA and volunteer work with disabled children wasn't enough to overcome her family's $28,000 annual income. I clicked again. Students like Jerome Washington, who scored in the 95th percentile on his SATs, but was rejected so that Bradley Morrison, whose father owns 3 car dealerships and whose transcript shows a 2.1 GPA, could take his spot. With each name and photo, I watched Stephanie shrink further into her chair. Students like Ashley Chen, who works 2 jobs to support her younger siblings and still maintained a 3.9 GPA, but was rejected because her family couldn't afford to pay the $15,000 administrative fee you were charging for guaranteed admission. The room was completely silent now. Mrs. Johnson, Helen said, effective immediately, you are terminated from your position at Riverside Community College. Campus security will escort you from the building, and all criminal evidence will be turned over to the district attorney's office within 24 hours. Stephanie stood up on shaking legs. This isn't over, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Danny will never forgive you for destroying his family. I looked at her, really looked at her, for what I knew would be the last time. Stephanie, I said quietly, I didn't destroy your family. You did, the moment you decided to steal dreams from kids who remind me why I became an educator in the first place. As security escorted her from the room, I realized that the hard part was just beginning. Now I had to go home and explain to my son why his wife was never coming back. I drove home through streets that looked different somehow, as if revealing the truth had changed the color of everything. Danny was in the living room when I walked in, still wearing my suit, still carrying the briefcase full of evidence that had just destroyed his marriage. Dad? He looked up from his laptop, confusion written across his face. What's going on? Stephanie called me crying, saying something about being fired and arrested. She's not making any sense. I sat down across from him, the same spot where Stephanie had delivered her ultimatums for the past 8 years. Danny, there are some things about me you don't know. Things I should have told you a long time ago. I opened my briefcase and pulled out the college ownership documents. I own Riverside Community College. I bought it in 2016 to keep it from closing. Danny stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. That's impossible. You're a janitor. I took the janitor job so I could be here for you after your accident. Flexible hours, full benefits, and I could still manage my business interests remotely. I pulled out the foundation documents next. I also run a scholarship foundation that's given $4.7 million to deserving students over the past 8 years. Danny's hands shook as he examined the paperwork. Dad, this says you're worth... This can't be right. $12.8 million as of last quarter. The college purchase, real estate investments, and my consulting business sale. He looked up at me with eyes I hadn't seen since he was Tommy's age, wide with wonder and confusion. Why didn't you tell me? Because you were happy. You and Stephanie had your life figured out. I didn't want to complicate things with money. But all those things she said about you, were based on what she could see. An old man in work clothes driving a beat-up car. Danny stood up and started pacing. She made me feel ashamed of you. My own father. I know. She convinced me you were losing your mind. I know that, too. He stopped pacing and looked at me directly. What did she do, Dad? Why was she fired? I pulled out the investigation report and laid it on the coffee table. She was taking bribes to reject qualified students and accept wealthy ones. $89,000 over 18 months. Danny sat down hard. She was stealing from kids? Kids who reminded me of you at 18. Smart, hardworking, but without family money to smooth the way. I showed him the photos of destroyed applications. She was also forging psychological evaluations claiming I was mentally unstable, trying to get me committed so she could take control of Tommy's upbringing. Danny's face went through a series of emotions: shock, anger, betrayal, and finally a deep sadness I recognized from my own mirror. My wife is a criminal. Your wife made choices that hurt innocent people. Now she has to face the consequences. We sat in silence for several minutes before Danny spoke again. What happens now? She'll be arrested, probably tomorrow. The district attorney has enough evidence for multiple felony charges: fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, falsifying documents. And us? That's up to you, son. But I need you to know that every decision I made was about protecting this family and helping kids who deserve a chance. Danny picked up the foundation papers again. $4.7 million in scholarships? 112 students this year alone. Jesus, Dad. The front door opened and Tommy burst in from school, his backpack trailing behind him. Grandpa! Guess what happened in math class today? He stopped when he saw our serious faces. Is everything okay? Where's Mommy? Danny and I looked at each other. This was the conversation neither of us was ready for. Tommy, Danny said carefully, Mommy had to go away for a while. Why? Because she made some mistakes at work. Big mistakes. Tommy looked at me. Is it because of what she said about you being dumb? Out of the mouths of babes? Partly, I said, but mostly because she forgot that being smart isn't about having money or a fancy job. It's about treating people with respect and helping others when you can. That evening, after Tommy went to bed, Danny and I sat on the back porch where Stephanie had humiliated me in front of our neighbors just 3 days earlier. I owe you an apology, Danny said. No, you don't. You believe the person you loved. That's what good people do. She made me ashamed of my own father. She made you believe what she needed you to believe. That doesn't make you a bad son. Danny was quiet for a long time. What do I tell people? About Stephanie, about you, about everything? You tell them the truth. That sometimes people aren't who they seem to be, and sometimes the people who seem the least important turn out to matter the most. My phone buzzed with a text from Helen Carter. Criminal charges filed. Trial date set for November 15th. Another from Patricia. Media requests coming in. How do you want to handle? And finally, from James Wilson. Security footage being preserved as evidence. Justice is coming. I showed Danny the messages. This is really happening, he said. Yes, it is. Are you ready for everything to change? I thought about Tommy's drawing, still folded in my wallet, the one showing me separated from the family by a fence. I've been ready for 8 years. The story broke on Tuesday morning. Local college owner exposes wife's admissions scam, ran across the front page of the Tribune, complete with Stephanie's mugshot and a photo of me in my professor robes from 20 years ago. My phone had been ringing since 6 a.m. Reporters, former colleagues, parents of students whose applications had been destroyed. By noon, there were 3 news vans parked outside our house. Danny and I watched the coverage from the living room, Tommy between us on the couch, trying to understand why his grandfather was suddenly famous. Dr. Edward Johnson, secretly one of the wealthiest men in the county, worked as a janitor for 4 years while his own daughter-in-law systematically corrupted the admissions process at the college he owned, the reporter announced from the steps of Riverside Community College. The camera cut to Helen Carter at a podium. We estimate that over 150 qualified students were denied admission so that wealthy families could buy their children's way into college. The Johnson Foundation will be contacting every affected student to offer full scholarships and guaranteed admission. My phone buzzed. A text from Maria Santos, one of the students whose application Stephanie had destroyed. Dr. Johnson, I got the call about my scholarship. I start classes in January. Thank you for not giving up on us. Another from Jerome Washington. My mom is crying. Good tears. We never thought I'd get to go to college. Thank you. And dozens more like them. But not all the coverage was positive. Some are questioning whether Dr. Johnson's deception was appropriate, another reporter announced. By hiding his true identity and financial status, did he enable the very corruption he ultimately exposed? Danny muted the television. Dad, are people saying this is your fault? Some people will always find a way to blame the victim, I said. What matters is that the students get justice. The knock on our door came at 2 p.m. I opened it to find Detective Lisa Morgan from the district attorney's office. Dr. Johnson, I need to ask you some questions about your relationship with Stephanie Johnson and the timeline of your investigation. We sat at the kitchen table where Stephanie had delivered so many ultimatums, and I walked Detective Morgan through 8 years of psychological abuse, documented corruption, and systematic theft. Why didn't you report this sooner? She asked. Because until recently, I only suspected something was wrong. I needed proof. And your decision to work as a janitor while owning the college that was an entrapment? That was a father trying to take care of his disabled son. The fact that it gave me insight into corruption was unfortunate but necessary. Detective Morgan closed her notebook. Mr. Johnson, I have to tell you, this is one of the clearest cases of fraud I've seen in 20 years. Your documentation's meticulous. Mrs. Johnson is looking at significant prison time. After she left, I found Danny standing in the garage, staring at the Honda Civic I'd driven for 4 years. Why this car, Dad? Why live like you were broke when you had millions? Because money changes how people see you. I wanted to know who you and Tommy really were, not who you'd be if you knew about the foundation. And Stephanie? Stephanie showed me exactly who she was. Someone who believed that being poor made you worthless, and being rich made you worthy. That evening we had an unexpected visitor. Mr. Henderson from next door knocked sheepishly, hat in hand. Edward, I owe you an apology. We all do. Saturday at the barbecue, the way we let Stephanie talk about you. You believed what you saw, Bill. Don't apologize for that, but we should have known better. You've been nothing but kind to our family for 8 years. Behind him, I could see Mrs. Henderson and the Moores waiting at the end of our driveway. We were wondering, Mr. Henderson continued, if we could do that barbecue over again, the right way this time. The following week brought a steady stream of consequences for Stephanie. Her arrest made national news when reporters discovered she'd been running the admissions scam for 3 other colleges through a network of corrupt admissions counselors. The total amount of stolen bribes exceeded $400,000. Her mugshot appeared on every major news outlet, alongside interviews with students whose dreams she'd crushed for money. But the consequence that hit closest to home came when Danny filed for divorce and full custody of Tommy. She tried to have my father committed to steal his grandson, Danny told the family court judge. She systematically destroyed evidence of her crimes while living in our house. I can't trust her around my child. The custody hearing was brief. Stephanie's criminal charges made the judge's decision easy. Mrs. Johnson will be permitted supervised visitation once per month, pending the outcome of her criminal trial, the judge announced. Tommy took the news better than I'd expected. So, Mommy won't be living here anymore? Nobody. It's going to be just you, me, and Grandpa for a while. Is Grandpa really rich? Danny and I looked at each other. Grandpa has enough money to make sure you can go to any college you want, Danny said carefully. Even if my grades are bad? Especially if your grades are bad, I said. Because that's when you'll need to work the hardest to prove you deserve it. The trial began in November. I testified for 3 hours about the pattern of corruption, the destroyed applications, and the students whose futures had been stolen. When the prosecutor asked why I'd continued working as a janitor, despite my wealth, I gave the simplest answer I could. Because the kids I was trying to help needed to know that someone believed in them. Someone who understood that your job doesn't define your worth, and your bank account doesn't determine your value. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. Stephanie was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution to every student she'd cheated. As she was led away in handcuffs, she looked back at me one last time. I felt no satisfaction, no sense of revenge fulfilled. Just sadness for the woman who'd had everything. A loving family, a good job, a chance to help young people build their futures, and thrown it all away because she believed that money was the only thing that mattered. 6 months later, I was back in a classroom. Not as a janitor this time, but as Dr. Edward Johnson, teaching a new course called Ethics in Education to students who'd received Johnson Foundation scholarships. Maria Santos sat in the front row, the same girl whose 4.2 GPA hadn't been enough to overcome Stephanie's prejudice against poor families. She was studying social work, following a path that reminded me why I'd chosen education in the first place. Dr. Johnson, she asked during our discussion about institutional integrity, when you were working as a janitor, did you ever want to give up? The classroom fell silent. 23 students, all of whom knew their professor had once pushed a mop through these same halls while secretly owning the building. Every day, I said honestly. It's easier to walk away than to fight a system that seems rigged against you. But you didn't walk away. No, because walking away would have meant accepting that some people matter more than others based on how much money their families have. And I've never believed that. After class, I drove to Danny's new house, a modest 3-bedroom in a good school district that he'd bought with money from the college's employee profit-sharing program. Tommy was in the backyard, practicing the baseball throws I'd been teaching him since he was 5. "Grandpa, watch this!" He wound up and threw a perfect strike to the makeshift target we'd painted on the fence. "That's my boy," I said, catching the ball on the rebound. Danny came out with 3 glasses of lemonade. "How was class today?" "Good." These kids remind me why I became a teacher. Any word from the foundation about next semester's scholarships? Patricia says we're fully funding 212 students this year. Biggest class we've ever had. We sat on the back porch watching Tommy practice his pitching form. "Dad," Danny said quietly, "I keep thinking about something." "What's that?" "If you hadn't taken that janitor job, if you'd stayed hidden in your office managing your money, Stephanie might still be destroying kids' futures. Maybe. Or maybe someone else would have caught her eventually. But you did catch her. And you saved all those students. I thought about the thank you letters I received every week. Students who were studying medicine, engineering, social work, education. Kids who might have given up on college if one corrupt woman had been allowed to continue stealing their dreams. You know what I learned from all this? I said. What? That your job title doesn't define your worth. Your actions do. Tommy came running over, grass stains on his knees and joy on his face. "Grandpa, will you teach me how to throw a curveball?" "I don't know," I said, ruffling his hair. "Think you're ready for advanced techniques?" "I'm ready for anything if you're teaching me." I looked at my grandson, 7 years old, full of potential, growing up in a world where he'd never have to question his worth based on someone else's prejudices. "All right then," I said. "Let's see what you can do. If you've been following this story, I'd love to know, have you ever been underestimated because of your job or appearance? How did you handle it? Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from, because sometimes the most important lessons come from the people others overlook, and sometimes justice comes from the most unexpected places.